Okay. Well, as y'all can see in this Zoom call, we've got the myth, the legend of the UK racing scene, David Clarke. This is Todd Wilson with the Tour de Todd Cycling Podcast. And to me, I'm going to tell you that this is a blessing to be able to speak to this man. I have followed Dave for a long time and always admired his exploits racing a bike. And now I get to talk to the man and learn about him as a person. Dave, thank you for giving me the time, bro, man.
It's a pleasure.
Good. Okay, so here's what I know. You are from the Church Gressley area. Tell me this, where is that adjacent to, let's say, the big cities of London?
So I'm north of London, kind of east, I guess, of Manchester, not too far from Birmingham, maybe, I don't know, 20 miles north of Birmingham, almost in the center of England.
Oh, not bad. Talk to me about you starting out. I know you started racing or riding at least on a mountain bike and then eventually turned to road racing and riding on the road. How did that all begin?
Yeah, so I started cyclocross really. So I started watching my granddad race, or not race, but watching my granddad ride, and then we watched racing on the TV, the Tour de France. You know, when I was very young, probably 3 or 4 years old. I guess Bernard Hinault time and the Greg LeMond era and that. And then after that, my granddad had gone on holiday to France and he brought back a little racing bike, 20-inch wheel. And so that's how I started, really. I'd ride. That was the first bike I ever had. I never had any other bike than this kind of little drop handlebar racing bike. And I'd ride along and he'd run behind, holding my saddle. And we got into it from there. And then I'd go, my brother rode a little bit as well when we were younger. So I got a younger brother. So after a bit, we'd go out, the three of us, CTC. And then, the first race I did was a cyclocross race where we weren't really, we weren't really set up for it. I got a cross bike that I just happened to have, my granddad had bought for me at that time. I guess I'd be 12 years old. But we got road tyres on, we got road gearing on. I wouldn't have had, I'd have had probably road shoes as well. So it would have been a challenge, but I think I finished mid-pack somewhere in the end. So it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great.
That's not bad. You had a good time, obviously, because you continued.
Yeah. But by then I was already hooked on cycling. It was already, by that point I already thought I'd be a professional cyclist. It wasn't really a question.
So were you all in from the beginning? Once you got that taste, that's all that you were about? Yeah,
I think I was. Whilst I was clever at school, I was dyslexic, so it was a bit of a challenge. And I don't think I think at a young age, you don't realise you can't do something, do you? It's not until you get older where you realise it's probably a little bit more challenging to become a professional cyclist. But, as a 5-year-old child, I thought you could become a professional, if you set your mind on it, that's what you could do.
I think that's a refreshing way to look at something, that anything is possible as a child.
Yeah.
Okay, so were you, to me, from what I've read, you were pretty successful as a junior.
Yeah, as a junior, I was successful, yeah. But so I think the first year junior, I raced a bit of mountain bikes and I raced like TLI races, which are a different governing body. So it probably wasn't, I would have probably been better, straight with British Cycling or BCF, I think it was back in the day. But it kind of, by the second year of junior, I would realise that mistake, and then I was, just on the road riding. I didn't really race mountain bikes at all much. I was fairly good. I was up there in a few of the national series. I won Junior Tour Wales, and a lot of the smaller races I didn't really. From probably like July, I didn't lose many races. I probably won most races to the end of the season.
Did you know right away what type of rider you were?
Yeah, I always knew I could climb well. There was very few people throughout my career really that could climb a great deal better than me.
Yeah.
So yeah, once I started racing, it was fairly obvious.
Did you ever get a look from the national team?
Um, so after winning the junior, or before I'd won the Junior Tour Wales, I did speak with someone from BCF as it was, and they indicated that whoever won the Junior Tour Wales, that was a key to the World Championships. Like an automatic qualification.
Yeah.
When I'd won Junior Tour Wales, I assumed that was my ticket to the World Championships, but it never materialized. I never went to the World Championships ever, to be fair, as a junior or anything else. And then later on that year, I'd started riding cyclocross. I still continued to ride cyclocross.
Mm-hmm.
And I rode an international in Dover where I won the under-23s competition, and it's still last year junior. And but that was the only race I ever got picked for. I did that for GB, but it was the only race I ever did for Great Britain. So.
Wow. Okay. So you age up out of juniors and now you're basically under 23. You decide to go race on the continent, correct? From France, Spain. You even went to Guadeloupe. What was the process, the thought process in going there instead of staying in the UK?
I don't think at the time there wasn't the scene at the time. So we had the Kellogg's Tour, the Wincanton Classic, the Leeds Classic, the Mill Race, and they'd all kind of died off by that point. So there wasn't a great big scene in the UK anymore. So it was I never saw it as an opportunity to be able to race professionally in the UK. I had a few years where I kind of raced in the UK and worked as a sports coach and bits and bobs, because I don't think I really understood at that point how to find a contact in France, how to find a team. I imagine it's far easier now with the internet, and you can, but then you need somebody to give you, literally a paper address, I guess, and you'd send away your paper CV and hope someone came back and gave you a place.
Yeah.
So it took me a few years to get round to that, and then, I guess when I was 21, I think I headed off then to France for my first year in France.
You rode for quite a few teams, a very famous team to be exact, ACBB. That's in Paris. In America. When you hear that name, that's like hearing Vendée. That's a very famous team.
So I did the first year in the middle of France, UCD Nord 87, which was a much smaller team, but probably a better terrain for me than Paris. Lumpier, more interesting training. But it was definitely small. We were a small budget team. You didn't have a team bike. We didn't have any kind of wage. I think we got free accommodation, and that was, even the energy drink you took to races, you would fill your bottles up beforehand and give them to the DS. And so there was no real funding other than you got your accommodation paid for, your electric, your gas, and whatever. So, but it was good. It was a good place to learn, and you did plenty of training. Everybody more or less in that team was English speaking as well. So it was easy to get by. And then the year after, I think I won 6 or 7 races that year. And so then I managed to ride for ACBB. I think I had Dave Rayner funding that year as well, and I had a bit of a wage for the team, so it was a lot better. It was a lot financially. It was a lot better, and we did some bigger races as well.
How difficult is it? I've had friends go over to France. I've had friends go over to Spain, and they say the racing is very difficult.
Well, I've never raced in the States, so I wouldn't say it was a great deal more difficult than the Premier calendars and things in the UK at that time. There was more strong guys, maybe, there was more people in the mix. There's a lot of riders getting a wage in France, but I'm not sure there was any riders that were really stronger than the strongest. If you pick the top 4 or 5 guys that were racing the Premier Calendar Series in the UK at that time, then they would probably have done well in France, in those races.
Now, what are we talking about for length of races when you were racing in France and Spain and Guadeloupe?
So, I mean, by that time, you were doing a mix of kind of UCI and amateur races, and races would be, anything up to 200, 220 Ks, I guess, the UCI races. By the time I got to racing in Italy, the races, became ridiculously long sometimes in Italy. You'd be doing races 260K or.
As an amateur?
No, I was racing professionally by the
Okay.
time by the time I got to Italy.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say is your standout race in as an amateur?
I'd probably say winning the King of the Mountains and the Bound Alsace stage of the Tour of Alsace. But I was going like, I guess those races came after my time in Italy. So I'd been to Italy 2003 and raced professionally, and then I couldn't find a team. That team finished, and 2004 I'd gone back to riding for Le Creusot in France. So yeah, I had some decent results. I'd had 6 twice by then in the national champs in Great Britain. So yeah, it's
pretty good. Talk to me about your time racing in Guadeloupe, because it's French speaking. It used to be a colony, or would I say a territory or colony of France?
Yeah, it still is. So it is, in effect, France. It's different. Cycling is very popular in Guadeloupe and, the surrounding islands, Martinique. So it really is like their national sport. They don't, they're not so interested in soccer or so from a kind of spectator point of view, you do any race you do, it will be lined out with spectators. Certainly, the Tour of Guadeloupe to them is like the Tour de France. In Guadeloupe, they're more interested in who's won the Tour of Guadeloupe than they are the Tour de France. And I think in that respect, it's very different. In England, you could win the national champs and you could walk into a local supermarket and no one would have the foggiest. Whereas in Guadeloupe, even if you're riding top 10 on a weekly basis, you can't walk around the local supermarket without, 5 or 6 people stopping you and knowing who you are.
Wow.
But I think from a cycling point of view, I'm not sure it was the most forward step, because you just probably like 10, 15 really strong guys that are getting decent money to ride in Guadeloupe. And then everybody else is a bit of a, you could, and it's always hilly, there's no flat races, there's not enough roads, and 90% of the races are reasonably hilly. So between some, generally South American, some Colombian riders when I was there, Flaubert Pinapilla, Daniel Bernal, some guys that have been pro in France or been very good in France, and then me and a few others, you could kind of, you could jumble those 10 guys around, and that was going to be the result of your race every single week, really. There was, and then I don't think you was quite as much in the public eye in terms of team selection and trying to move on the year after. I think maybe it would have been better to stay in Europe. But at the time, I don't think I had any great offers in Europe. I think by then I'd finished with Dave Rayner Fund. So, I mean, it allowed me to carry on riding. Like I say, the money wouldn't have been great, but it was reasonable at the time. It was enough to live off. You got accommodation and so yeah, it was okay.
You did some racing in Africa. Talk to me about that, because you told me I talked to you about the Tour of Egypt. Talk to me about that.
The Tour of Egypt. So that's later on. That was almost. I guess that was between the time when I kind of almost finished when I rode for KTM, and then I did a year where I rode for Pinarello Giordano, but I started working at the time. And I did a few races in Africa that year. I did Tour of Egypt was the first race of the year. And it wasn't, I mean, in one respect, it was nice. It was the same hotel. You were racing out of 7-day stage race, but I mean, it just wasn't what you'd expect from an international race once you're out racing. There was not the police escort you'd imagine. I mean, there was a bit of a police escort, and the police and the army at that time were at odds. So I guess the police, in a way, were kind of keeping incognito, which doesn't really help them run a cycle race. And
Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably the one race where you didn't feel that safe. And I mean, for me, I was in the front most days, but I think for a lot of people, you know, when I spoke to other teammates we had at that race, they were off the back, you know, they were riding around and there were people with Jeeps with guns, and it just didn't seem as good as it could have been.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so when did you turn professional?
It's 2003 would have been the first year I rode professionally.
Did you? Okay, there's one thing to turn professional, and then there's the feeling of being professional. Did you have that feeling?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I mean, in a way, once you decide to go over to Europe, you almost are like a professional, aren't you? You're training and racing every day. And I think that's one of the good things about doing that. I assume it's the same if you come from the US. You can't carry on with your everyday normal life. You know, it's not easy to work a part-time job in France, or so you just are there solely focused on riding your bike. And for those, you know, 7, 8, 9 months a year, you're there. You just train the best you can with what you've got. And so, yeah, I mean, in Italy, we were doing big races. We're doing a lot of big races, you know, Europe, Germany, France. So in that respect, you were racing, you know, I guess at the time, Quick Step, Johan Museo, I don't know, did a race with Pantani, right? That would have been the year, that would have been the beginning of the end for Pantani, wouldn't it? 2003. So,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, so it was, you felt like you were in the mix. I mean, obviously, you knew you weren't getting that kind of financial input that the other guys, you know, you'd turn up to a race in Italy and we'd be crammed into our team Volvo, and you'd look at the other riders turning up in their Porsches and stuff, but it wasn't, you know, you weren't in the same league financially, but we definitely did some decent races. Yeah.
Not bad. Okay, so being a professional. Okay, so here's what I've got. I've got Endura. I've got NAD 4. I've got Synergy Baku, Mazi Kuwait cycling team, and KTM along with Endura, endurasport.com. So racing for those teams, how did you do financially? If you don't mind me, I don't need a dollar number. I'm just curious. Did you have to have a second job, or were you scratch? Were you doing okay? Could you get up and say, okay, today I'm going to train and I don't have to worry about anything?
So I think all the time while I was in Europe, you were always training every day. You know, there was, I mean, the early years I'd have gone back and worked in the winter or done something a bit different in the winter. But yeah, generally I kind of just about scrape by. So the first time I was at Endura was Endura Sport 2003, and then those other teams came a few years afterwards. So between then, I'd gone to Guadalupe, like you say, and then I'd gone to the Cruzo. So I think I did the Cruzo the year after. I'd done Guadalupe the year after that, and then I'd rode for Nippo. I think no, I think the following year I'd rode in Belgium with no team is when I'd signed for a Pro Conti team, Endeca, and it didn't quite come off. So that fell through. And then I think I rode for Nippo, which at the time wasn't a professional team, but to all intents and purposes may as well have been. You know, we did nothing but UCI races, and it had been, and it, you know, it has been since a big team. And so it was very geared up like most pro teams are. So there wasn't a lot of difference between, say, riding for those and riding for Enduro or.
Yeah.
And then I think the following year was the year that we had the Pedal Tech disaster, which was another Pro Conti team that I'd signed for. Fell apart in January. So again, I think I tried to set up my own team then, which was probably more hassle than it was worth. Looking back, I don't think I would have done that again. I think I'd have just rode, you know, tried to find a few sponsors and rode on my own and seen what results I could have got. Then I did 2 years at Pendragon, kind of a British team, and then that's when we were back to like Enduro in 04, KTM, which we're all, yeah, you could survive on the, you know, it was like what you get for working in a shop or a factory. It was a reasonable-ish wage. And then Massey Kuwait came right at the end of, that was the last team I ever rode for. It didn't really go, I only rode really a few races. I did a couple of like I don't know, 1.1s in Spain. And then I'd gone to the Tour of Algeria, and I think this Tour of Algeria is not really one tour. It's like 10 races, I think 5 little stage races and 5 1 days over the space of about 3 weeks. And on the second of the day of the first stage race, which was probably 3 days of racing in, we'd finished the race and I'd done okay. And the Finnish gantry was really, really windy, and the Finnish gantry blew over, and the scaffolding hit me on the back. I was sat on the team car, and so the scaffolding landed on me, and I ended up in hospital for a bit in Algeria. And then I'd already had a few back injuries, and that really put me out for most of that season. And that was, by then it was curtains, really. So that's the last time I did it. I might have done, a few races since, but that's the last time I really raced.
Okay, there's something I want to ask you about. I hear about this all the time, and you mentioned it just a second ago. The Dave Rayner Foundation, if I'm correct. Yeah. He was a former professional that died, and that foundation was set up because in his name. Can you talk to me about, most people who do not follow the UK may not know how important that foundation is to helping young racers be able to ply their trade?
Yeah, I think so. Like you're saying, Dave Rayner was pro cyclist, just I guess on the up, really. Young cyclist. He went out one night in a nightclub, and I think he had a fight with the bouncers. Ended up getting killed. So after that, a group of, I guess, ex-professional cyclists and people that knew him in the Yorkshire, Lancashire area set up the Dave Rayner Fund, which since, I guess the aim of the Dave Rayner Fund was to fund riders to be able to go abroad and ride. So initially they only funded riders, you had to have a team abroad, or they would, maybe they'd find you a team abroad, but it wasn't to fund riders racing in the UK. And yeah, it's been instrumental, especially in the early years, I guess, when there was less British teams. In kind of my time, it would be more essential than ever, because it just wasn't the opportunities to race in the UK, or make a living in the UK, or find your way onto it. There were no, when I started racing full time, there was no UK professional teams, so there was no Sky. So yeah, Dave Rayner Fund really, I think probably in our era, most UK riders have come through Dave Rayner Fund, Charlie Wigalius, myself, Fleeman, and probably most of the pros you can think of. Yeah.
Wow. The racing, when I first noticed you, there was I don't know if the name has changed. I believe the name has changed, but when I first noticed you, you were doing a Premier League race, Premier Calendar race. And that used to be the top for the elite, the top racing calendar. Races that I've always remembered were, I've got them written down here: Lincoln Grand Prix, the Archer Grand Prix, and then the Isle of Man International. Talk to me about how important and how tough that calendar is.
Yeah, so the Premier Calendar, I guess, is different to a lot of other racing leagues in the fact that it's not UCI, but at the same time you've got a big mix of, I guess now you've got 5-6 continental teams. Maybe you've got the odd World Tour rider turning up, and you've also got British amateur teams there. Yeah. So it's tough racing. It's always been tough racing. I mean, there's not as many now as there was back in the day, but when I first went abroad, there's probably 15 Premier Calendars, all decent races, decent length, all 100 mile plus road races. Like you say, Tour de Peaks, Lincoln Grand Prix, Lincoln Grand Prix is national champs this year.
Yeah, that's right.
At the time, the Manx International was was a UCI race. It wasn't part of the Premier Calendar series. I think it has been since I stopped occasionally. The Isle of Man itself was a big cycle festival. Yeah. So you've got about 7 days of different racing, some crits, some other road races, and then at the end of the week, you've got the races around the Isle of Man TT motorbike circuit, which is 37.5 miles, and it's got a big, probably like a 5K climb in it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was the big, on the Friday, last day of the week, you get all the pro teams turn up for for 3 laps of that course, really. I think I won King of the Mountains there in 2003. That's the last. I think that was the last time they had it as a UCI race until they brought it back more recently. So.
Wow. Well, we want to send hats off to Ben Swift for winning the national championship just recently on that course. And at 33, I believe.
Is that how old is? Yeah,
I think he's 33 years old.
Probably is, yeah, because he was racing. I can remember racing a lot with Ben. So yeah, he would be, yeah.
Wow. Okay, there's something I am going to bring this up because it is specific to, as far as I know, to UK racing, and you used to do it a lot, and it's hill climbs.
Yeah.
Hill climb racing. Okay. What I remember from it is like you guys have the bare bone bicycles. I mean, in the most aero thing that you could possibly find, lightest bike possible, and you're going up a mad climb to win. And I understand the UK has a national championship hill climb. Talk to me about the hill climb situation in the UK, because it feels like people love it.
Yeah, it's the hill climb scene is probably 2 months at the end of the season. So you've got September, October, and the last weekend in October is always the national championships. And it's basically that there's no minimum weight limit on the bike. It doesn't have to be available to anybody else. So it's not like the UCI race where you have to be able to go and buy that part off the shelf or from a shop somewhere. So basically, yeah, there's no real rules in terms of what you can do and what you can't do with the bike. And a lot of riders just specialize in that discipline. So the climbs can be anywhere, I guess, from a short one could be a minute and a half, and a long one, odd ones are probably 20 minutes long at the longest. Yeah, but you get big crowds. You seem to get more extrovert crowds, people turning up, banging saucepans, fancy dress. Yeah. I mean, the weather's never great because it's right at the end of, it's pretty much British winter by then. So, but yeah, it's a good scene. It's a scene that I rode, certainly the early parts of my career. The last time I rode was probably at Endura, so 2011. Yeah, I had some reasonable success, to be fair. I think I got 6 medals maybe over my time, 3 silver, 3 bronze.
Yeah. This is always a sticky subject with anyone that has raced at the top level. So I do want to ask this. When it comes to the drug scene, how did it affect your career? Were I've always understood that you were very, nah, that's not my thing.
Yeah, that's right. I guess because I'd had a few years working in the UK, and well, it just wouldn't, for me, it would have ruined cycling. I was there to see what I could get my body to achieve, and the satisfaction was in doing the best I could do. But no, it was certainly the early years of my career, there was, it was obvious. People, I think, especially in Italy and Spain and France, they assumed that professional riders took drugs. Even the general public didn't seem to, didn't seem to stigmatize drug taking. Maybe more so in the UK, but when I was racing in Spain, it was common to see refrigerated suitcases going into hotels. There probably wasn't another rider on my Spanish team that was clean, if I'm being honest. And at the time, I did talk to Fornat, which at the time was a really big team, and they were kind of saying you've got to kind of toe the line if you want to join a team such as ours. So I think the offer was on the table, but it wasn't something that I was willing to do. So yeah, I think now cycling seems a lot cleaner, and it's certainly a lot less acceptable, isn't it? So I think in those days, yeah, like I was saying, even the general public didn't mind. But at least now, everybody professes to be clean, don't they? And it's certainly, people that are caught taking drugs that are now out of the sport like they should be, and probably the general public don't look up to them. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a big problem. My time you got Festina, you got
Yeah.
Armstrong. There's
Yeah.
very few riders that didn't have a problem in that era.
And that sucks.
Yeah.
Do you think it had an adverse effect on your career?
It's bound to have, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I tried not to at the time when I was racing. You were concentrating on trying to win the races or do the best you could. But I mean, those guys definitely had an unfair advantage. You see it now and again, don't you? Where you see a rider come from being mediocre to being very good and then failing a test. Yeah, so it would definitely be different. Yeah, a lot different. I think if I'd have ridden now, or maybe 5 or 10 years from now when it's completely clean, it will be a completely different sport.
Not bad. Did you ever grow when you were growing up? Did you have an idol? Did you have someone that you looked up to? For me, I had several. I had Nelson Vales. I had Eric von der Erden. I had Etienne de Wilde. Those guys. The reason is I just loved sprinting. I just loved it. I'm fascinated. To this day, I am. Did you have someone that you looked up and said, "Man, I'd like to ride like that person"?
Yeah, I think when I was young, you'd see I guess the great GC riders, because I could always climb, and you'd watch those Alpine stages, Alpe d'Huez, and I guess Bernard Hinault, Le Mans when he won the time trial against Fignon.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of those riders that you looked up to. He's still there. Your pictures froze.
I'm here. I'm still here. Yep, I'm still here.
Yeah,
I'm still.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, and I guess on the UK scene, there were like the Mark Lovetts, the John Tanners, the people that were up there at the nationals, maybe going to the world champs with GB, and it was almost a bit disappointing, I guess, when I started, 2021, and you were beating those guys that you looked up to, and then it's hard to idolize them when they finish 5 places behind you, isn't it? It's
not bad, not bad. What would you say is your most memorable feeling, moment, or place that you were at that you think about quite a bit? I mean, was there a point where you were just riding in the field and you look up and you're like, Lord, David Clarke is here? Can you believe that?
I don't know. There was a moment where you were surprised to be there, but there were certainly moments, that you remember fondly. Like I won East Yorkshire Classic Premier Calendar when I won that with Pendragon, but obviously I raced at that point. I was racing abroad a lot, and it was good to come, to win a race in the UK with, my mum there and my family there, and then Tour of Britain. I was first Britain Tour of Britain in 2012 in 04, and it was the only time I'd ridden Tour of Britain. So again, it's a good atmosphere, isn't it? You got, I don't know, a few 100,000 British people every stage, and yeah, so it's nice to be able to do it at home sometimes. Yeah,
not bad. Okay, so I want to ask you about some people that that you would know well, obviously. I think the first person I'm going to ask is I was always fascinated with this man. I just thought he was one of those. He was like they call a hard man, and that would be Russell Downey. What are your thoughts on Russell Downey?
Yeah, Russ was a great rider, like you say. He was like I've described him as like a little bulldog, but he always seemed to be, in the drops, out of his saddle, sprinting away. He'd get result after result. He could do a bit of everything. He could climb okay. He could sprint well. I mean, when he won Tour of Ireland, he got a very weak team. And yet he managed to put away a lot of World Tour teams. He got the likes of Armstrong there and stuff. And to do that, from a UK based, I mean, it was a continental team at the time, but it made, he was the only real strong rider on there, and a lot of the guys were at college or at work, so he'd done it off his own back mainly. Yeah,
No,
real fun guy.
not bad. Okay, another one that comes to mind. You were teammates in France. Dan Fleeman.
Dan, yeah, Dan is just, he's all about the bike. So Dan doesn't know anything else other than cycling. You'd go around to his house in the evening and he'd be on the cycling forums talking about cycling or looking at books about cycling. I think even to this day, he didn't pass his driving test for years, Dan. So, everywhere was on the bike, everything was about cycling. I mean, even now he works with a cycle coach, and I think he just is only cycling. Well, he was a great rider. We had some good training sessions. We used to train a lot with Dan Fleeman, and he'd never back out of a training session. Didn't matter how cold it was, how wet it was. We'd be up there in the Peak District, half wheeling each other. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Not bad. The last one I'm curious about is we had talked earlier. Malcolm Elliott. Now he's big. He was big here in the United States, but I don't think when he rode for LA Sheriff, but I don't think many people understand that this is a guy that actually won stages in the Tour of Spain. He was a hell of a sprinter in Europe.
I believe that he was number one rider in the world in that year when he was up there in Tour of Spain, and he was a strong rider. And I think he was strong and he could sprint. So,
Yep.
A lot of the time he could get through the hard races. And if it was a small group, even when he got older and he'd made his comeback, he was still a decent sprinter. He could still win a bunch kick. And so, like you say, he had his bit of racing in Europe where he was extremely good. And then he went to the States. And then he completely retired for maybe 6 or 7 years. And then when he was my age, he came back at 42 and he raced again all the way up until when he was 49. And at the time, we had some good duels at times he was a strong rider. I remember racing Durham Tour Series with him, and I remember thinking it's an uphill finish. I don't really get beat on uphill finishes. And I remember him out sprinting me and Christian House on that finish. And you think, for a guy that was near enough 50, it's almost unbelievable. Yeah. I think he won the Premier Calendar Series the first year he came back overall. Strong guy.
Wow. What is David Clarke doing now?
Now, David Clarke's a plumber, come gas engineer. I've got a few properties that I'm renovating. I do a little bit of coaching as well. That's it really. A little bit of riding when I get a chance.
Yeah. Okay, wait a minute. So you're coaching riders, but this is a man that did not have much of a coach during his career. So how is David Clarke as a coach?
I think probably different to people expect. People have got this view of me where I just used to go out and do, 7 hours a day, day in, day out. I think if you talk to anybody, that's the kind of, and I was reasonably scientific. I mean, I did do plenty of long rides, but then, if you want to race those races, you don't get around a 260K race by doing 3 hours, do you? And so, I mean, the riders that I coach generally don't have a great deal of time on their hands. So a lot of them are, working on small programs, I guess 10, 12 hours a week. So it will all be quite intense, just trying to focus on what they need for their particular disciplines, if it's time trialing, if it's hill climbing or... So I think they probably think I'm quite hard as a coach, but then, when you've raced at a decent level, you kind of know what work needs to be put in.
That's right. Does it bring you great joy when you see your riders succeed?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of older guy now. He'll be veteran next year, so he's 39 now. So he's almost my age. And I started coaching him maybe 5 years ago. He was one of the directors at a plumbing company that I did a bit of subcontract work for. And now he was fifth in the National Hill Climb Championships this year. He's won a few rounds of the National Time Trial Series. He's got 2 kids and he does it off the back of probably 10 or 11 hours a week. So I think it's quite a success story with, what he's got to bring to the table. That's always quite a good feeling.
Not bad. Couple of quick shots I'm gonna throw at you here. If you had unlimited budget for a bike, what would you buy? And would it be mechanical or electronic? Because I know you come from a different time where it was strictly mechanical. but now they got everything, a lot of things going electronic. Plus, would you use disc brakes?
Oof.
Yeah.
So I'd have some kind of Pinarello, Dogmo F, I guess. Electronic gears, probably yes, because I used to hate it when you did a wet race and you know your cables were clogged up and you get to the end and you couldn't get it in the 12. And so disc brakes, I'm not so sure about disc brakes. I've never, other than my mountain bike, I've never ridden or a road bike with it. So even now, I'm still riding rim brakes.
Okay.
I don't know. By the time I got my Dogma F with, you know, Di2 or EPS or whatever, I'd probably be happy whether it was disc or manual, you know, standard rim brakes.
Understood. Okay. If you had unlimited budget, where would you go to ride anywhere in the world? Since you are a world traveler, where would you go and who would you go with?
So I think probably the Murder Hoy finish of Flesh. I'd have to buy myself a place on a World Tour team and just have, you know, if I could get to that last kind of 2K of the race. I think I always looked I used to live in Leuven for a bit in Belgium. And so I've ridden that hill. You know, it was probably like a 5-6 hour ride from where I was. So, you know, I'd ride out, I'd ride it a couple of times in training and ride back. So, yeah, I would have a go at trying to win the race on that climb. I think I would have had in my day, I would have had a decent shot of doing a ride up there. So it'd be nice to have a go. I'd have to do some training first, maybe.
Who would you, if you could pick anybody that you could do a ride with, who would you pick?
That's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know, you know. It'd be nice to ride with the modern day riders to, you know, yeah, good question. But at the same time, it would be nice to ride with a Fiasco copy if you could bring them back to life, wouldn't it? And,
Yes,
you know,
sir.
when you know, you look at the Eddie Merckx's and the Bernard Hinos and they were riding Ghent Wevelgem and then going and doing, you know, 100Ks afterwards and, you know, riding Flanders at the weekend after and stuff like that. It seems like another world, doesn't it? Even harder than we train today. So that would be quite interesting. Although it would be a painful day, wouldn't it?
Oh, there's no question. I think for me, it would be Eric van der Erden or I would have to say Etienne de Wilde.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big 6-day fan. So it would be either van der Erden or Etienne de Wilde, or I'll take a third one. Guido Bontempi.
Really? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, big fan of his. Let's wrap this up. Do you feel, last question, do you feel that you got everything you could out of your career?
No, I don't know that many riders do, but I guess for me, I rode for KTM. KTM was the last team that I rode full time with, and they went bankrupt. So that wasn't really how I wanted to leave it. Yeah, I just didn't. I signed for a few Pro Conti teams that just disintegrated into nothing, or you know, the contracts didn't come off. So that was always disappointing. No, I think we could, given the right support, and you know, imagine how different it would have been if you'd gone and rode for an Ineos at 22 and you'd had, you know, 15 years riding for a team like that. I think it would have been completely different, yeah. Especially if I could have done it 10 years later when the sport was a lot cleaner.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to say thank you. Again, to me, this has been a treat to talk to someone that I admire, and I'm older than you. It's just, I just saw you one day in a magazine. I used to read this magazine called Bicycling Weekly.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, Cycling Weekly. And I would go to this shop called Schindler's in downtown Minneapolis, where I'm from, and they had all the magazines from all over the world for cycling. And that's where I first saw you. And from that point on, I've been following you ever since. So it has been a treat for me to be able to talk to you. And I've followed you for a long time on Instagram. So I do get to see you quite often. So I just want to say thank you. It is a blessing to get to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you too.
Oh, and please tell Mark McKay that I would like to talk to him.
I texted Mark McKay last night, and I sent him a link to some of your podcasts. So hopefully that will happen soon.
Thank you again. Have a blessed one, okay?
You too. Thanks
You got
very
it,
much.
bro. All right.